Good morning, everybody. This is the second in this series, The Way in the Manger. And as I said last week, one of the things about this series is we get more and more Christmassy as we head towards Christmas. And I just wanted to kind of begin with a question for you all. And you can shout out answers, okay? So it's kind of a congregation participation thing. So if you want to shout out answers, I just want you to imagine for a moment, I want you to imagine Christmas Day with your family. What do you see and what's happening? Okay, imagine Christmas Day with your family. What do you see? What's happening? Who wants to shout some answers out? Fun and laughter, that's a good one. Excitement. Plenty of food, that's a good one. Are we having plenty of food? Excellent. Opening gifts. Chaos. Right, okay. Let's avoid Eleanor's home. What else do you see? Pardon? Love, yeah, love. That's good. Gifts, hope, yeah. Brilliant, Eunice, excellent. Washing up, okay, we'll finish there. Before we start asking for volunteers, okay. Okay, so I want to take you back now to the first Christmas Day. And what no one could see and no one could imagine on that first Christmas Day, apart from perhaps Mary and Joseph themselves who'd been told by God what was going to happen. But I think on that first Christmas Day, if you'd asked anybody in that area, in Bethlehem, in Nazareth, in Jerusalem, wherever in the world, they would have really struggled to imagine what was about to happen. Because no one was expecting it. No one was expecting this, that a teenage peasant girl was going to give birth to a son in a stable, and that son would be the one who had been promised for generations. Nobody was expecting that at that moment. And that son that Mary gave birth to, he would grow up to be the most famous person who's ever lived. Everybody in the world knows his name, whether they follow him or not. And that Jesus, he would grow up and he'd gather a small following from Israel. In fact, worse than that, a small following from Galilee. Galilee was kind of the poorest armpit of the Roman Empire. It was a place that nobody ever saw anything good coming from. And yet Jesus gathered a small following from there, and within a few generations, that occupying empire were proclaiming Jesus as their God. Nobody was expecting that. Nobody foresaw that. Nobody imagined that. Nobody would imagine that he would become such a threat to the religious establishment that they had to lie about him and eventually kill him. And no one imagined, even though he told them this was going to happen, no one imagined that he would rise again from the dead to prove he was who he said he was. The Son of God, sent by God to show what God is like and to reconcile each of us back to God through his death and resurrection. Nobody was imagining that. Nobody was thinking about that. But here's the good news, because it's always good to have good news, isn't it? Here's the good news. You don't have to imagine it. You don't have to imagine it, because here we are. 2,000 plus years later, here we are, celebrating Jesus. Right now, you don't have to imagine it. This is what he has given. This is what he's produced. You are the gift that he's given to the world for this generation. And whilst nobody might have been able to imagine that, whilst it was completely unimaginable to the people of that time and that day and that moment, what it does prove to us, if it proves it proves lots of things, but the main thing it proves to us is this: that the unimaginable is possible. The unimaginable is possible. And for us as believers in this time, what it tells us is, even though we can't see how God can help us, even though we can't see how things will change, even though how we can't see that we can get through something or past something or something's going to happen, the unimaginable is always possible with God. And that's such a key, important thing for us to remember, not just at Christmas, but for the whole of the year. So I'm going to start with a verse that might sound a little bit obscure to you. It's a verse that you will all, most people will know, and it's from John. And John wrote this down. John was an eyewitness to the ministry of Jesus and an eyewitness to his death and resurrection, and he was a follower of Jesus. And he writes this down, that Jesus told him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me." Now, people who want to get offended by things sometimes get offended by that verse. Are you saying that Jesus is the only way to God? Here's the point. In context and in that time, that wasn't a verse and a saying that was intended to narrow things down. At that time, God's people on earth were the Jews, and they'd kind of lost their way. They got bogged down in a lot of religious traditions and rules and things. And basically, they'd made it really difficult and really hard for anybody who didn't fit all their standards to even find God and feel that they could have any relationship with God. So when Jesus is saying, "I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life," he's not trying to close that circle down further. He's trying to blow that circle wide apart. And he did that. And the evidence is us. The evidence is believers all around the world, from every culture, every ethnic group, every culture, every ethnic group, every class, every wealth standard, right across the world. There are no barriers to finding God. Jesus has blown that way open. And when he came in a manger, that was the end goal, was to open up that way to God for us. And something else in this verse is what I want to really talk about this morning. In that verse, kind of, I don't know whether you think about things like this, but it's something that's implied. It's something that's, there's a trendy word for it, it's baked into this verse. There's something that is real and underlying this verse. And this is what it is, that Jesus didn't just come to provide the way. He came to show us the way. And that way is a call to us as followers of Jesus. So if you follow Jesus, this is a call to you. A call to us that not just to believe something. You know, it's quite easy to believe something. It's quite easy to sign up to something. But Jesus hasn't asked us to sign up to a set of beliefs. The beliefs are important, but that's not the end that he is aiming for. He hasn't just asked us to sign up to a set of beliefs. He asked us to follow him in a way of life. The Jesus way of life. The way he came to model, the way he came to show us. And it's that I really want us to focus down on. What does that mean this morning? What does it mean to be and live in the way Jesus wants us and asks us to live? The first thing it means is really simple. Because Jesus is who he said he was, if we live this way, it will be better for us. Because we were created to do this. We were created, every human being is created to live this way, the way that Jesus tells us about. So it's better for us. It's better for others. Because if we live this way, others will be blessed. They will have a better life. So it's better for me, it's better for you, it's better for everyone. And Jesus said, this is how I want you to live. I want you to follow me, and I want you to live this way. I don't want you to just believe a set of things and come to church on a Sunday and say, yeah, I sign up to that. I believe that. This is my doctrine. These are my things. This is my club. He actually wants us to live a way of life. A way of life that he goes on throughout his ministry to describe, and then those who followed him went on to describe it even further. So what did Jesus imagine when he looked forward to what Christmas would be like? What this Christmas would be like? What did Jesus imagine? I want you to imagine just for a moment, I want you to go on a journey with me. And every time I use that word imagine, something really unfortunate happens in my head, and it's just happened again, which is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory comes into my head, and there's that song, Come With Me and You'll See a World of Pure Imagination. And I wanted to put the video up, but my learned team decided that wasn't the best thing. And we would be breaking some copyright rules. So we haven't got that video. And here's the good news. I'm not going to sing you the song either. But I do want you to imagine something with me. I want you to imagine the world Jesus was imagining when he agreed to come to earth and be born in that manger. I want you to imagine a world where people who are skeptical and unconvinced about what we believe, and maybe don't want to believe, and never ever think they'll believe, that they will believe that Jesus is the Son of God, sent by God to show us who God is and to reconcile us to God. But they might never believe that. But those same people are amazed by how well we treat each other and how well we treat others. Where they're amazed by how we talk about each other and talk about others. Just imagine a world where they're amazed by how we show up for each other and how we support each other and how we're there for one another. Just imagine what that sort of world would be like. Imagine this. A world where Christians who don't worship the same way, think the same way, do things the same way, don't do communion the same way, or baptism the same way, don't interpret difficult scriptures the same way. Imagine a world where we never let those things divide us. I think this is what Jesus imagined the church would be like. Imagine a world where Christians don't vote the same way or have the same political views, and yet we don't let that divide us. Imagine a world where the community around us, and this community around us, I know we come from all over, but this is our mission field, because this is where we are as a church. And imagine this community out here, because this community, we've discovered from the events that we've been doing, and we've got Jingle Jam coming up, what we've discovered is they come from every nation and every ethnic group and every background and every income strata. Imagine a world where this community around us are amazed by, are surprised by, are no strings attached concern and care and love for people who are nothing like us. Imagine a world where people who don't believe what we believe probably never want to believe what we believe. Imagine a world where they want to work for us. Imagine a world where they want us to work for them because of who we are and of what we bring and our character and our integrity. Imagine that world. Imagine a world where people want to hire us first for jobs, where people want to move to live near us, where people want to live next door to Christians because of our predictable, consistent, extraordinary character. Imagine that world. Imagine a world where, because of our work ethic, our self-control, our reliability, our honesty, our integrity, we stand out. Where we're different. Not because we just say we're different and tell people we're different, but because we are different. We live by different standards. We live a different way. The way that Jesus, when he was in that manger, came to show us with his life. Imagine a world where people drive by churches and drive by our church and see our sign, and definitely will see our sign is better when we're in the community centre. But they drive by, they think about the neighbourhood that they live in, and they think we are better off because those Christians are here. The world is a better place. My neighbourhood is a better place because those Christians turn up and that they've planted themselves here. Imagine a world where Christians have got a reputation for selflessness. Imagine a world where Christians have a reputation for putting others first all the time. Imagine a world where Christians didn't come to church thinking, what do I get out of it? But came to church thinking, what can I put into it? Imagine a world Christians are known for putting others first, preferring others, promoting others above themselves, and thinking about others before themselves. What do we think that would be like? I want to take you back to a little history lesson now. This occurred in 197 AD. So about 160 plus years after Jesus had died and was resurrected. And at that time, Christians were being heavily persecuted. They were being murdered and locked up right across the Roman Empire. And there was a man, you might have heard his name. He was a historian, he was a politician, he was a philosopher, a guy called Tertullian. And Tertullian wrote a letter, but his letters were a bit like some of my older preachers. There was 35,000 words in Tertullian's letter. But his letter is remembered for just a little short paragraph at the end, because what he was writing was a defense of Christians, why they should not be put to death, why they should not be persecuted, why they shouldn't be locked up. And this is what he said. He said, but it's mainly the deeds of a love so noble that are leading many to put a brand on us. That's not a brand as in we branded Christianity. That's a brand as in burnt into your skin. See, they say, and what is it? What is it about these people that makes them stand out? It's this. See, they say, how they love one another. See how they love one another. for themselves, these people who are doing the persecution are animated by mutual hatred. But the Christians, they're ready to die for one another. For themselves, the people who are doing the persecuted will sooner kill others, put them to death. The Christians stood out. There's another guy, a little further on in our history lesson, he's called Cyprian. Cyprian, he was the first bishop of Carthage. He's known because he is the first African theologian. So he's the first on the continent of Africa. He was the first theologian. He was the bishop of Carthage. And he writes in AD 258, so a bit later on in history, another 60 years or so on, he writes this, and he's writing to a friend, and his friend has he's kind of cool name. He's called Donatus. Donatus. I kind of like that. It sounds very holy, doesn't it? Donatus. Anyway, Donatus. If I climbed some great mountain and looked out over the wide lands, you know very well what I would see. Brigands on high roads, pirates, pirates on the seas, in amphitheatres, men even murder to please the applauding crowds. Under all roofs, misery and selfishness. Nothing's changed. It is a really bad world. Donatus, it's an incredibly bad world. Yet in the midst of it, I have found a quiet and holy people. They've discovered a joy which is 1,000 times better than any pleasure of this simple life. They are despised and persecuted, but they do not care. They have overcome the world. These people, Donatus, are the Christians. This is the way of Jesus, where whole empires are changed, not because of what we say we believe, but because of who we are. More than anything else, yes, the Holy Spirit came to give us gifts. He came to give us spiritual gifts. But more than anything else, he came to create in us the character of Jesus, to do something that we couldn't do for ourselves. And it is that character which is the most powerful force in history. The most powerful thing about a Christian is not what you say you believe, it's who you are. And the more you look like Jesus, the more powerful, the more you stand out, the more different you are, and the more difference it makes. I'm trying. Here's the way of Jesus. It's a world where we are as committed to behaving correctly as we are to believing correctly. Here's my question. Is that too much to imagine this Christmas? Once upon a time, the others first culture of the church stood in such sharp contrast to the me first bite and devour culture that the church was surrounded by, that it made a difference. Once upon a time and through history, there have been Christians who've literally embraced the inconvenient, countercultural, can't possibly work way of Jesus. And that's the thing. I think a lot of us, we don't really realize the importance of that character formation and of living that way because we think it won't work in this world. Well, it worked in a savage Roman Empire where the one thing you couldn't do was proclaim somebody king because that was Caesar and he was God. And yet that character and that Jesus in people overturned that empire until Jesus was proclaimed God. That first Christmas, Jesus came to show us a way that's better. Better for me, better for you, better for all of us, but better for others too. Not just us Jesus followers, but better for everybody. If we follow this way, it's not just better for us, it's better for the world. And sometimes we think Jesus just loves us. But Jesus came because the Father loved the whole world. And when we have a division between love for those who are in and love for all those who are out, we're closing that circle again that Jesus claimed to blow wide open. The first Christmas, Jesus came so that we could be a people who lived out what he taught, so that they stood out to change the world around them. They lived out what he taught so that they stood out to change the world around them. And Jesus, that little baby in a manger, he modeled the way for us. He modeled what the way acts like, what the way looks like, what the way reacts like, what the way responds like, what the way makes decisions like. He modeled all that for us. And he defined the way for us. And he defined it really simply. And I'm going to define it really simply for you today. He defined this way. And he defined it, and this is, I'm going to use some long words. He defined it as the governing ethic by which all decisions and choices should be measured by. The governing ethic by which all decisions and choices should be measured by. So your decisions, my decisions, everybody who claims to follow Jesus' decisions, every decision, every choice, we measure by this ethic. And when we do that, we break out of that circle. And that's the freedom that Paul talks about. It's the freedom that Jesus talked about. It's life. It's living the Jesus way, which is the best way for you. And here's the way. That way in a manger. That way that Jesus personified. That way that Jesus talked about. That way that Jesus said should govern everything. And it's summed up. It's summed up in a word that if you've been around church, you've probably heard before. If you haven't been around church, or you're not, this is your first time in church, then it might be new to you, but it's a Greek word. And it's a Greek word that is kind of difficult for us to define that easily in English, because we have to try lots of different words to add up to this word. And that word, and this is the governing ethic that Jesus gave us, and he gave us it in a word. And that word is agape. Agape. What does agape mean? It means loving people like Jesus loved us. Loving people, not just other believers, but loving people like Jesus loved us. Because remember, when Jesus loved us like this, we weren't believers. We came to believe because he loved us like this. And here's the point. That is not how the world works. That is not what you see modeled to you in the workplace or in the university or in the school or wherever else. This is probably not even what you've seen modeled to you in your family. And that's why it's so powerful. Because it's nothing like the world. And so Jesus, he gathers his disciples. Like we're rolling forward 33 years now. And Jesus gathers his disciples at the end of his life. And he says this. and I'm kind of paraphrasing, everything I've taught, everything you've seen, everything that's happened from the manger to this moment and what's ahead with the cross, everything, in all of that, what I want you to get is the way to live is, the way to work out what to do when you're not sure what to do is, the way to treat people, how you treat people, how they treat you is love. This is what he said. I'm giving you a new commandment. This is John chapter 13. I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other as I have loved you. So you should love one another. Now, if we say we believe Jesus, if we say we follow Jesus, that is not optional. That's not an option. Jesus is saying that's the way, that's the governing ethic, that's the big thing. That's the main thing, you should keep the main thing. Love one another like I've loved you. So you should love one another. And I'm thinking, like, if I was a disciple there, if I was one of Jesus' followers, and I'm in that room and he comes out with that, and he said, by the way, lads, I'm going to the cross. I'm going to die. And this is what I want you to do. And you followed Jesus for 3 years, and in that 3 years, you thought he was going to take control. It was all going to pan out really well. And you get to that moment, and you go, Jesus, like, you've expected him to say, and this is what we're going to do. And that's the plan. That's the plan. Like, if I might be a bit overly cynical, but if I was a Jesus follower in that room, I'd go, that's it. That's what the 3 years was about. That's what you want us to do. And I would have said, that's so different from the world that'll never work. And yet it did, and it does, and it'll keep on working. And it'll keep on working as long as we live it. You see, when we go against the grain of that, so when we, just let's take the other side of the thing for the moment. When you live contrary to that, it also produces results. When we say we believe things but don't live like that, it produces pain. It produces hurt. It produces offense. It produces division. And then we sit there and go, why don't people want to know Jesus? And sadly, and I'm sorry for this, if this has happened to you, but it's usually because they've met one of us. And we didn't live like that. And that's not what they saw. And that's not what they felt. And that's not what they heard. A little later, Jesus comes along and he says this, I have loved you, even the Father has loved me. So remain in my love. Remain in my love. When you do what I ask, you're remaining in my love. You see, here's the point. It's really difficult to feel Jesus' love for you if you're refusing to show that love to others. Because you're kind of living contrary to it. It just doesn't work. So, when you do what I ask, you remain in my love. Just as I obey my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you these things so that I've told you these things, not so that you would be burdened down, but so that you would be set free with my joy. This is a happy lifestyle. This is a positive lifestyle. I sometimes think the reasons some Christians I've come across who are so miserable, the reason they're so miserable is because they're not living this. They're doing something else. When we live like the world, we'll be miserable like the world. It's just, that's the way it works. I've told you these things so you may be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. This is my commandment. Again, if you follow Jesus, this is not optional. Love each other the same way as I've loved you. Now, if you're not a Jesus follower, you get a pass. However, given that this produces a better life for you and a better life for others and a better life for everyone, you might want to think about whether you should consider exploring this a bit more. Paul, many years later, he takes this word and he takes it and he writes it in a letter to the Ephesians. And thankfully, Paul was a bit shorter than Tertullian, and his isn't 35,000 words long, so you can go and read it. It's a letter to a church in Ephesus. We call it Ephesians. You'll find it in the New Testament in your Bible. And he says this: therefore, be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in the way of love. So Paul's picked this up and he's gone, this is how we live. This is how God himself lives, and this is how it's best for you to live. Walk in the way of love, as Christ also loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice for a sweet-smelling aroma. This is cool. This is amazing. He is saying, if you live like this, something happens in heaven where you smell nice. You get God's attention when you live like this. It's a sweet aroma. And you know, one of the things that aroma affects, you know, if you ever sat next to somebody who's got really strong aftershave or really strong perfume on, of course, if it's your aftershave or perfume, you can't smell it at all. But you sit next to them and then you walk away and you smell of it. It affects that which is around it. And Paul also writes. So Paul writes to another letter to believers in Rome. And this is what he says: love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love fulfills the law. Everything you can think of, every rule you might have heard, everything that you've set yourself to live by, every command that's in the Bible and all that stuff that was in the law and all the rest of it, Paul is saying, if you live like this, you don't have to worry about that, because this is a higher standard. If every time you're making a decision, every time you're in a situation where you're reacting, every time you've got a choice to make, every time somebody treats you wrong, every time something goes wrong, every time life goes badly, every time life goes well, if you ask this question, what does love require of me? That is what God requires of you. It's simple. It's character. It's life. It's the Holy Spirit forming Jesus in you. Can I have the worship team back? Jesus had a brother, and his brother was called James. And I'm a big fan of James, because basically, if you're your sibling, how many of you got siblings? I haven't, you see. But if your sibling said that they were the Son of God and they were the Messiah, what would you think? That's exactly what James thought. So James turns up at some point in Jesus' story with his mum Mary, and they tell Jesus, just come on home. Come on, we'll help you. You've gone way off track here. Just come home to your mum. Come home to your brothers, because this isn't working, Jesus. And yet, when Jesus rose again, James realized that everything his sibling had said was true. And he started to follow Jesus. He became the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and he established the church in Portugal and Spain. And so he got it. So because James is kind of notable for saying you actually have to live out your faith. It's not enough just to believe things. And this is how he categorized everything you need to know about living out your faith. He called it 3 little words: the royal law. This is what my brother, who was sent by God to show us God, this is what he asked us to do. It's the royal law. He's the king. And when we've got a king, we do what the king asks. That's what being a, it's the advantage of being a king. People have to do what you ask. So when you're a king, you do what he asks. And this is what he asks: love one another in the same way I've loved you. Put others first before yourself, the same way as I did for you. And if you do that, we will have revival in this nation. This nation can turn around. This nation can change. There are hundreds and hundreds of people out there who will turn to Jesus because they'll see Jesus in us. Let's stand. Father, I thank you. I thank you that you sent Jesus to show us the way to live, the way to walk out what he came to do. And I pray, Lord, that you would help us this week as we go from here, just to take that on board and think about it and let it just settle down in our hearts and our spirits. And that we might be just a bit less like the world and a bit more like your Son. Thank you, Lord. Amen.